I was browsing a bookstore when I came across a magazine entitled Wonderpedia. I was instantly attracted to it due to the cover story, The Biggest Threat to Mankind. I thought that such a lengthy magazine article on the existential risks that mankind faces in the future would be an uplifting and enlightening read for such an existential nihilist as my good self. So without hesitation, I purchased said magazine. Suffice to say, I was not exactly blown away by the author's astute appreciation of just how tenuously mankind clings to its temporary survival at the start of the 21st century, but I felt at least that by critiquing the piece, I could further develop my understanding of the many issues the article both explores and perhaps just as revealingly omits. As I read the article, I started to become profoundly and increasingly aware of how the author's ability to perceive the breadth and magnitude of the existential risks that face mankind in the coming decades and centuries appeared to be severely impaired. One can only speculate about the possible reasons for this shortcoming of the author. However, I think it is instructive, when ruminating on this, to ponder on the agenda and purpose of the magazine itself. So with this in mind, I shall read the mission statement of the magazine, which is located on the very first page of the magazine in its entirety. Our aim at Wonderpedia is simple: to bring you the best our amazing universe has to offer, from the extraordinary achievements of history's pioneers to the scientific feats of today's trailblazers. Yet while we continue to be constantly curious about the planet and its many mysteries, the human body is just as incredible and perplexing. So, in this month's issue, we've included a pull-out wall chart celebrating the human body and brain. We've collected 69 fascinating facts about the astonishing bodies we inhabit, from the brain having a power consumption roughly equivalent to a 20 watts light bulb, to the nail on the middle finger on your dominant hand always growing faster than the others. Who knew? Due at least in part to the hyperbolic nature of the sentiments expressed in this mission statement, it is, in several striking ways, easy to compare it to theistic-inspired ways of apprehending ourselves and the world around us. First, we have the universe being described as amazing when such a value judgment has no place at all in the scientific worldview, resting as it does on a subjective impression of everything that has, is, or will ever exist. This is certainly a worldview that is at odds with many people's conception of the universe. For many, this universe is just as likely to evoke feelings of trepidation, indifference, horror, or disgust as it is awe or wonder. Ditto the perception of the human body as incredible, a claim that is certainly not bolstered by the disclosure of the fact that the nail on the middle finger of our dominant hand grows quicker than our other fingernails. Please forgive me, but such facts certainly do not reduce me to tears of awe when I reflect on the structure and function of the human body. Certainly, my imagination was stimulated more by the fact, proudly broadcasted on the magazine's wall chart, that victims of decapitation have been known to still appear to be alive up to 15 seconds after their heads have been separated from their bodies. However, I would also argue that the juxtaposition of words such as incredible and amazing with a brazen declaration that a person may still be able to consciously experience phenomenological states after having their heads completely severed from the rest of their body is an extremely poor taste. But perhaps that is just me. Secondly, we have the phrase celebrating the human body and brain, a phrase that conveys a nauseatingly unabashed and unreserved adoration of the defecating and slowly rotting slabs of meat and mishmash of organs that constitute the human body. Now don't get me wrong, I am all in favor of celebrating an event or set of circumstances if it is unambiguously, or at least unarguably, fortuitous to all interested parties to a greater or lesser extent. However, one merely needs to take a stroll through a cancer ward or a graveyard in order to develop a certain mixture of ambivalent feelings towards the true nature and function of the human body, in all its gory and or macabre detail. Thirdly, we have the phrase, the astonishing bodies we inhabit, which is, I put it to you, an intellectually dishonest way of conceiving of the relationship between body and mind that carries with it the unmistakable stench of Cartesian dualism, reinforcing as it does the twin notions of our minds and bodies being ontologically separable from one another, and secondly, of the former residing within the latter. Such crude and primitive conceptions of the human animal have served the interests of the clergy and religious thinkers for millennia, but at the start of the 21st century it is disappointing beyond belief that our cultures are still utterly awash with such intellectually vacuous beliefs and memes. My main issue with the undisciplined usage of such language, as evidenced by the phrase, the astonishing bodies we inhabit, is that it encourages us to conceive of the relationship between mind and body in intellectually dishonest ways, and therefore it belies a mere superficial abandonment of the theistic conceptions of the human animal that human culture and monotheistic religions in particular have passed on to us like some seductive but logically erroneous rumors. That of a human mind being analogous to a homunculi living inside a body and peering out of its body through its eyes, rather like someone peering out of their bedroom window in the house they inhabit. If a person inhabits a house, one can simply move to another house and the original integrity and identity of the original inhabitant remains perfectly intact. Minds, on the other hand, do not inhabit bodies. Minds are an emergent property of particular bodies. Minds are an emergent property of particular arrangements of DNA, and sentience is merely an emergent property of a fully functioning and awakened brain, just as wetness is an emergent property of liquid. If you remove wetness from liquid, you no longer have liquid, and if you remove a mind from a brain, you no longer have a mind. There are therefore no rational grounds whatsoever to regard the mind as something that inhabits anything, be it a body or anything else. The mind is simply an emergent property of a brain rather than an independent construct that can be conceived of as existing within the physical organ that is the brain. And it is an emergent property that relies upon unusually complex configurations of energy/matter being manifested in the form of electrochemical activity that occurs as an integral part of the brain's functioning. In this, when viewed in an intellectually honest manner, amoral, meaningless, redundant, comically overrated, pitilessly indifferent, and mostly and thankfully unagitated universe. To reiterate, a mind, if by which we mean the stuttering thoughts, feelings, and emotions that constantly flicker in and out of conscious awareness, can never be divorced from the brain that creates and experiences said conscious states, because the brain, that is, one of the organs of the human body, is the very thing without which conscious awareness is not possible. The presence of a human body is a vital condition for conscious awareness to be experienced, and thus we ought not to conceptualize minds as some kind of ghost in the machine. Minds no more inhabit our bodies than wetness inhabits liquid. Instead, the mind is simply an emergent property of a fully functioning and awakened brain, just as wetness is an emergent property of a particular configurations of molecules that give rise to the presence of liquid, and thus it is just as ridiculous to conceptualize minds as separable from brains as it is to conceive of wetness existing independently of liquids. Fourthly, right at the end of the mission statement, we have the trademark rhetoric that is so prevalent in the speech of theists and politicians alike, in the form of the "who knew" utterance. This question is not asked with the intention of eliciting a literal answer, but with the intention of stoking up amazement and awe of the human body and mind in the reader. Given that this is the case, I feel compelled to inform you that the author utterly failed to achieve this in my case, not least because it is self-evident, to me at least, that the brain consumes a great deal of power in the form of food and rest, due to the fact that when I am tired, a lack of clarity in my thinking is one of the first symptoms of sleep deprivation I unmistakably become consciously aware of. I honestly think I would struggle to find a vastly superior illustration of how fickle human emotions can transform laughably trivial and mundane facts about the human body, such as how many calories it burns, into grounds for an orgy of self-congratulatory self-worship. But there you have it. To conclude, I am arguing here that the perverse practice of celebrating the human body and mind, as advocated by this magazine, is both facilitated and conveyed to others through a series of intellectually dishonest maneuvers, including the conflation of a series of subjective impressions of the universe with an objective and incontestable group of facts, the usage of language which both takes for read and encourages readers to adopt a Cartesian dualist perspective regarding the nature of body and mind, and finally, the adoption of rhetoric in order to appeal to the emotionally driven and fickle nature of the human animal. These tacit modes of thinking, at least in part, enable the author to forego reason and to embrace a worldview in which the human animal is a creature greatly deserving of adulation. Bearing all these failings of the author in mind, we arguably have an exceptionally strong candidate for a pivotal reason why the publisher of this magazine allowed such a poorly researched and intellectually impoverished article like The Biggest Threats to Mankind to be published in Wonderpedia. An article, incidentally, that mirrors the way the majority of the human race in 2012 AD regard existential risks to our species in the future, if they even stop to consider them at all, that is. If one is even remotely enthralled to the wonder and beauty of the human body and mind, which the author clearly appears to be, it may be somewhat psychologically distressing to seriously entertain thoughts of the human race becoming extinct in the not-too-distant future. Read hundreds of years, or perhaps at a stretch thousands of years hence, rather than billions of years hence. I personally struggle to conceive of a more compelling reason why the future fate of the human race's extinction is systematically ignored, repressed, ridiculed, and typically discussed in such a short-sighted and tunnel vision manner, to the staggering extent that it is. I say tunnel vision because the article I am about to critique at length showcases the author's utter ineptitude at identifying, let alone grappling with, the biggest threats that face mankind in the coming centuries. The author's inability or unwillingness to do so can be considered analogous to a man or woman wearing blinkers which blind them to the magnitude of the dilemma we are in, both as individuals and more abstractly and collectively as a species.